Okay, let me give my little spiel. It's 7:03 and I know you have a lot of content. So
Yeah, fine.
I pasted, actually, let me paste it again just in case, because I don't know if people get, like if you can see the chat backwards, but just in case.
Yeah, the most recent is at the bottom.
Okay, so, oh, there,
Oh,
I
there it
linked
is.
them. Okay, yeah, so part one, the recording is up and the slides. Part two, the slides are up if you want to follow along, and we'll have the video up probably tomorrow. If you want to just look at our website, we do have a meetup scheduled for next month that is up. It's a developer meetup. It's how to use the MVC model view controller pattern philosophy to build your WordPress theme. So that's actually on a Saturday and it's a longer meetup. It's like a 2-hour workshop with a half-an-hour Q&A. So that is up. And then we're also planning a Pennsylvania-wide meetup in April. I think it's April 7th. And that will be, it's a Wednesday. And then we're doing a panel of freelancer small business owners and how you do client onboarding. So that'll be pretty cool. We'll have a moderator and 4 to 5 people from across Pennsylvania on how they do client onboarding. And then I'm also speaking at a California WordPress meetup in March, and I'll probably put that on Twitter as well. If you use Elementor, I'll be speaking about Elementor. So that's coming up. It won't be on the WordPress Pittsburgh site, but I'll tweet it just because I'm from here. I want to tell you. So if you want to come, because it's all virtual stuff. So that is our stuff. Yeah, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And you also notice too, we're getting a little bit of a brand refresh. So we got a new logo made, and we're going to have some new, Twitter banners and YouTube headers and things like that are happening. So yes, we're refreshing the group as well. So awesome. Okay, so welcome. I'm thinking that maybe a lot of you aren't from Pittsburgh, and that's cool. I'm glad you could come. And I'm just going to turn it over to Mark, and because he has a lot to say. So thanks, Mark.
This guy talks a ton. I used to be a teacher.
Give us the info.
Yeah, from the last presentation. So that's where the ability to talk comes from. So I'll just go ahead and hit share screen now, and then, okay, this is the right screen. And I'm going to move this. So again, if it's always weird if I'm like not looking at the screen just in the right way, so it looks like I'm actually connecting with you. It's because I'm looking in multiple places at some notes and everything. So that's that. So thank you everybody for being here. I know some of us were talking about bad weather. I hope if it is snowing, you're able to just stay inside and hang out with somebody cool and stay warm. But thanks for being here tonight with our meetup part due. Okay, and if anybody catches that little reference there, that is a reference to one of my favorite childhood movies, Hot Shots Part Due. If you've never seen a man shoot a chicken with a bow and arrow, check out Hot Shots Part Due, because it happens. Charlie Sheen, one of his greatest roles. So just like the last meetup that we had, if you were a part of that from tonight, I just want to continue to hit you with more thoughts and actions that you could consider adding to your Divi workflow, so that as you're working with Divi, it all comes back to that aspect of working more efficiently, more confidently, and more consistently with this tool. And just like the last meetup, I'm going to break this one down into 4 pieces, providing an overview of part 1, then talking about the importance of optimizing your building techniques. Number 3, and it's the meat of the presentation tonight, is sharing ways that I do things with Divi that can help you possibly refine your techniques. And then we have Q&A at the end. When we get into the ways to refine your techniques, it is a big presentation. There are a lot of slides and there's a lot of information. Again, some of that is because there's going to be images and stuff within there. But try not to get overwhelmed by all the different techniques that are brought to you. I'm sure you're going to have techniques that I don't even talk about that you can share during the Q&A. But my kind of philosophy with this type of stuff is, if you can even just take one thing that you can go act on and then evaluate and start to determine, is this for me and how do I handle this? And then once that becomes part of your everyday repertoire, now you come back and say, okay, what's the next thing that I'm going to work on? And I kind of mentioned this with myself. With each project that I do with Divi, I'm like, okay, what's the one new thing I'm going to do in this project? And then the next project, okay, what's the new thing I'm going to do here? Since the last meetup, I did go ahead and started messing around with custom post types and custom fields because that was brought up. And that's something that I wanted to get into the presentation tonight. So if you're like me and you're brand new, you'll at least get a little bit of that mentioned. So thank you for whoever it was that brought that up. But just take one thing, go learn one thing, and then come back and say, what's the next thing? Okay, so for those of you that weren't in the meetup last time, a little intro for myself. Again, I'm Mark Cunzolo from Beaver, Pennsylvania, where everything is a sheet of ice right now. I looked this up. I'm exactly 21 days older than at the time of our last meetup, which is interesting. Time flies. Still the co-owner of Peculiar Pxl, thankfully. And I've been a Divi user for 5-ish years. I can't remember if it's a little under 5 or a little over 5, which really just means I've made a ton of mistakes with using Divi. And I'm just glad to be able to be here tonight to share some of those mistakes and then some of the ways that I've started to work around those mistakes, and hopefully that helps you do the same. So part 1 of tonight is just quickly reviewing part 1 of the entire 2-part meetup. In part 1, we talked about establishing your workflow, and we were talking about that from a larger stance, talking about your workflow and Divi being a part of your workflow for an entire project. And we said that a workflow is a structured process that you followed in order to complete a project or even a portion of a project, and that it had steps that were all connected and built off of one another to help you accomplish something bigger. And in doing so, we identified a number of benefits that came from actually having and following a workflow, as well as improving your workflow for every single project. You know, a big one is establishing clear expectations for your clients when they know what they're going to get, when they know what the scope of the project is, when they know what the goals of the project is, and all of that is set out ahead of time. It makes it a lot easier for you to present ideas, and it makes it a lot harder for them to start adding things into the project, because you're able to then go back to the stuff that you worked into your workflow ahead of time as checks and balances. The more you work through your workflow, you're going to get a greater feel for how long does this section take me? How long does this section take me? And so you can come up with more reliable timelines and estimates that you can give to your clients, as well as improve team communication. If you're working in an agency and you have a workflow, you're able to tell your team members, here's where we are at in the project, and even start to assess, is this project in danger of slowing down and getting behind? Are we ahead, or are we in just the right spot? So please make sure you go back and check out the previous presentation if you want a little bit more detail on each of these benefits, but there's just a lot of great things that come from instituting this type of a workflow. And we started that workflow with a client questionnaire where we were asking them, who's your audience? What are their goals? What are your goals? So on and so forth. And then we kind of went down this waterfall in our workflow from step to step, where we took the content from the questionnaire and used that to create a site map, where we were telling the client, the website's going to have all of these pages. It's going to have these features and these functions. Once we knew that, then we actually used, or I used XD to draw out the wireframes of the entire website. Then I talked to you about local development using a blueprint site, so you didn't have to keep adding the same plugins and doing all the same setup every single time. It's already done for you. And then once we got into Divi, it was all about planning and preparing, style guide, library of blocks, navigation, to really set up a great foundation for yourself, so that once you got into building the pages, you could start with the easiest page, go to the most difficult, you end with a checklist, and everything is just flowing at that point. And I pointed this out last time, almost 80% of that workflow is planning and preparing, and it's that 80% that is going to make the huge difference in that 20% and make that 20% just feel much more easy and like you're winding the project down, not stepping into the crazy part of the project. So Renee put this into the chat, but I just wanted to reinforce that you can catch the replay at this link here. There were some great questions and things discussed at the end as well, so make sure you go back and check that out for full context about what we're talking tonight. So that was part one, talking about our workflow from a project level. But the other part that we need to talk about, that's right, there's more, okay, is the more technical side of your workflow. If we're talking about using Divi in WordPress, then there's a lot of technical nuances for how we could use this tool that either make it a nightmare or make it a dream to work with. So that's what we're really focusing on in this presentation, is how do we efficiently build the elements of the website with Divi. So there's our project main steps. Now we're getting kind of down into the minutia of using Divi. So in part two, I want to talk about why it's important that you optimize and refine your Divi building techniques. And like I did in the previous meetup, I'm going to do that by going back to the beginning of how I used Divi and just emphasize the frustration I had and how that changed over time. So at the very beginning of when I was using Divi, I had two big problems. Number one, I treated Divi kind of like one of those Goosebump choose your own adventure books. I don't know if anybody ever read those as a kid, but I loved those. And essentially you read a few pages and then it would say, if you want to go through the door, turn to page 20. And if you want to jump out the window, turn to page 25. And inevitably I would make a choice and turn the page and I was dead, you know, and then I had to go back and choose the other option. And I had to keep bob and weaving my way throughout the book, kind of like hitting a dead end every time and then needing to find the correct way out. And that was kind of how I treated Divi at first. From project to project, the way I handled the custom code, how I interacted with the builder, how I chose to handle designs between pages, as well as what plugins and tools I was using, I kind of changed that up from project to project, which made it feel like a choose your own adventure book. And number two, I tried to force Divi to be and to work like a tool that Elegant Themes never really intended it to be. What do I mean by that? You know, and some of these came over time, but they had the visual builder, they had the built-in design tools, the efficiency features, compatibility with custom post types, the theme builder. And for the longest time, I just said, nah, I'm not going to use any of that. I'm going to use Divi for creating, you know, basically page structure. And then I'm going to do all my styling myself in a child theme. It was the way that I approached it. That's really not how the tool was intended to be used. And so that led me to feeling like this classic meme. If you've ever seen this meme, you're welcome. If you haven't, you're also welcome, because this is one of the best memes. But this was me at the time. You know, I wanted to use Divi just for structure, and I was like, I'm going to do all my styling my own way and not use any of these parts. And it ended up leading me into points where my code was confusing to me, my build times were really slow. You know, I was forcing myself to reinvent the wheel with this tool. And one thing I really wanted to point out here that you might not have thought of is that I was missing out on community. You know, Divi has a very large community, and they're all talking about these new features and these new aspects of Divi. And I was like this Divi purist where I'm like, no, I only use it to do this, and I do all my styling here, and I don't use the visual builder at all. And I just kept clinging on to that, but I was missing out on the conversations. I was missing out on the community, and it just kind of caused me to feel really isolated. And I did think it was important to address why I was like that. I kind of felt a little, like, it sounds like extreme, but I felt a little shame over using Divi in its completion. And I think that some of that's because at the time I felt like the WordPress community wasn't as accepting of page builders or people that use page builders. And I had more than one instance where I went to community gatherings, and when I mentioned that I use Divi with WordPress, it was like people were judging me in my use of WordPress. And it just kind of didn't make me feel great about myself. So I started to feel like I need to use Divi as minimally as possible in order for me to be a real WordPress user. But then that led to me being frustrated in my use of this tool. So over time, I thought of this phrase here while I was putting this presentation together. After, enough fire, you realize you don't like getting burned. And that's what was happening from project to project. I was worried about what these people thought of me, but I was also not liking my time with using Divi. And eventually that outweighed it. And I just had to realize some of us are legit developers. Renee just talked about at the very beginning of this, having a meetup for developers that are working on something I don't understand, but that's okay. That's that group of developers. Then some of us are power users. That's where I would place myself, where we know HTML, CSS, we know some JavaScript and jQuery, we know some PHP, and you can take code that people have created and kind of deconstruct it and figure out how to do your own thing with it. And then some are installers. They know how to pick a theme, put it in place, and put the content in. And the thing that we all have to realize is there's room, success, and ample opportunity for all of us to be successful in this market. There's clients at different steps. I had a friend who was really he definitely is a developer. He just has that mind. And he criticized me for my use of Divi and just was like, he would never use that. But one of us started a business and is now working with clients. And unfortunately, the other person has fallen out of practice. And thankfully, I have a meeting with him Friday, actually, to start talking with him about maybe being a contractor for our business. But it's about stepping into who you are and embracing it and just, hey, this is who I am, this is how I work, and this is who I work with. So if you stop fighting that and you embrace the tool, then you get the benefits. And that's what I ended up doing. So as I've continued embracing Divi and its features and learning which of them I use and which that I don't, 8 major benefits that I've experienced as I've refined my techniques. Obviously, speed. As I'm using more of their efficiency features and their built-in designing tools, I'm getting faster with how I'm creating these websites. Consistency and repeatability. If I know exactly how I use this tool every time, I can just jump right in and work. And I can also build blocks and aspects that get shared between the sites that I create, so I don't have to keep creating the same structures uniquely for every single website. Customizability. Because I'm able to utilize both Divi's features and my own techniques outside of Divi, I'm able to take it one step further than maybe the stock Divi website that you would see. I'm sure we can all identify when we see a Divi website. You're online and you look at it as soon as it loads and you're like, that's a Divi website. And you go and you check out the source code and boom, there it is. So customizing it further helps you get beyond that. Easier maintenance. As I start utilizing presets and find and replace and extend styles and all those types of things, or the new global color options that just came out, that makes going back and making changes to the site easier. Client and contractor ease of use. Again, I'm just being introduced to custom post types and I'm already seeing how refining that technique is going to make client upkeep of those types of posts or pages much easier for them. Your overall enjoyment of working with Divi. I kept beating my head against the wall trying to get these techniques to work until I finally just said, okay, I'm going to try these. And then surprise, I enjoyed working with it much better. And lastly, staying up with the built-in tool set and community. Now it's nice to be able to hang in the conversation, and you may not use a feature exactly how they intended it or to its full extent, but at least you can get into these conversations now and pick people's brains about how they use it and why they use it, when they use it, and it just helps you figure out the best way for you to use it. So if you want to start experiencing more of these benefits as you work with Divi, then you need to be able to answer some questions like this. Okay, do you go straight to Divi or do you use your own child theme? Or I'm sorry, do you go straight Divi or do you use a child theme in concert with that? How much of their built-in styling options do you use, or are there times when you don't use them? How do you handle your custom CSS, JavaScript, and PHP? Are you using their presets? Are you using their library and efficiency features? If so, which ones? What's the process that you follow for optimizing your site on mobile? What are your go-to tools and resources that you keep on hand while you're working with Divi? And are you creating templates with the theme builder for those pages and posts that use all the same structure and basic type of content? If you're not able to really answer these questions, then a big issue with that is that you don't have a process or a technique put together that you can constantly assess and improve. You know, it's not till you say, this is how I do things, that you can start to assess it and figure out, how do I make the way I do things better? So if you're looking through questions like that and you're like, I really don't know how I handle these types of things, that's what I want you to start thinking about. And as we step into this third portion of the presentation tonight, I want to present you with just some thoughts to consider for techniques that I follow and use in my own practice. Okay, so that was part 2. Let's step into part 3 with technique number 1, if everybody's good to go. Okay, so the first thing that I wanted to mention tonight was using a child theme. And again, these are my own preferences for how I work with Divi. You, based on your skill level or knowledge or the types of clients that you work with, it may not apply, but for what I'm doing, these types of things really apply. So using a child theme is the very first thing I wanted to talk about. So a child theme is one that you install on your site that inherits its functionality and a lot of its design and style from another theme, otherwise known as the parent theme. And the main reason that you're going to use a child theme is that it allows you to create and manage and reference all of your custom code in an organized space that's your own. So you've got like Divi that has just all of its files. And then you've got your child theme, which may only have just a handful of files that you can go back to, and all of your customizations are within that child theme. I have some major benefits listed there. You're going to enjoy the parent theme features, but you can make it your own. You can maintain your customizations even after the parent theme undergoes an update. So if you didn't know, if you're making like PHP or CSS changes to Divi, and then Divi comes out with an update, when you update, that's going to overwrite your changes and now they're gone. So if you put your changes in a child theme, you can update Divi every day and your child theme customizations will remain. It gives you centralized organization for all of your code, so you know exactly where you're going to go each time to make those changes. And as you've seen with other certain developers, you can create child themes that you can then even sell on the marketplace and make some money for your hard-earned time that you've put in there trying to make this child theme. So I just want to run through the basics of how do you make one, how do you install it, how do you access it, what's in it, what's in mine, and just give you some basic tips with that. So if you are able to code your own, you can make your own child theme. There's plenty of tutorials out there for doing so. It's really only a certain package of files that you need to put together in order for it to constitute a child theme. But you can also get one created for you free online. There is this developer for Divi, PA Creative, who's right here in Pennsylvania, and I would vouch for them. I read their blog, I watch their videos, I've messaged back and forth with them a good amount of times just to even ask them questions about where do you think Divi's going in the future, and like just chatting. They're a good community member. So I really trust what they're doing. And if you go to the link that's shown there below the image, they're just gonna ask you for your email, and then you share that with them to be on their blog, which they put out helpful content, and then they will give you a child theme that you can download. So if you want it to be as simple as possible, you go to their website, share your email, and you get a free child theme. So when you want to install that child theme, they're going to give you a zip file, and all you have to do is go into your WordPress dashboard, into Appearance, Themes, and click Add New, and then you're going to upload the child theme zip file that they've given to you. Now you can open that zip file and change it and rename it in any way that you want. Just make sure you re-zip it up afterwards, and then you can upload it into your Appearance tab. So then once it's uploaded, how do you actually access the files? Well, one thing that you can do within the WordPress dashboard is under Appearance, you'll be able to access your theme file editor, and you'll be able to access the files in that way, and you can work with the code right in the back end. Or you could use FTP to go into the back end of your website files and mess around with your child theme there. For myself, I actually always disable the theme editor and the plugin editor as a safety measure with my websites. Just in case, I mean, I use a really secure username and password as well as two-factor authentication and good hosting. But if somebody were to get into the back end and then they can access this editor and access all these files for my site, I'd rather them not be able to do that. So I disable those two things. And instead of FTP, I access my backend files using SFTP. Flywheel is my host, and they just offer a great method for doing that. So you can then get into those files from your child theme in either of these methods, and you can start to edit your JavaScript and CSS and so on and so forth. So I actually downloaded the child theme from PA Creative and wanted to show you what you'll get with that. Okay, so you'll end up with a screenshot.jpg, which is different because I thought it had to be a PNG, but it worked. So this is just what's going to show on the back end, and I'll show you an example of that. You need your style.css. You will have your custom JavaScript, and then you'll have your functions PHP. So again, the screenshot is going to show in the appearance page. Style.css is where you're going to put your custom styling. Script is your custom JavaScript or jQuery, and functions PHP is where you'll kind of enqueue. How do you say that word? Enqueue or enqueue? I always have to say enqueue every time that I'm typing it out, so I remember how to spell it. But that's basically, for lack of better terms, calling your scripts or your style sheets into action. I'm trying to think of just how to say it very simply, but it's getting them kind of registered with WordPress and firing. I apologize if I'm butchering that terminology and somebody is like pulling their hair out right now. Power user, okay? And then you can put custom PHP snippets in there as well for doing various things with your site. So that's what you're going to get from them. It's very bare bones. They have all of the on-queue actions already set up for you, so you can just install that and get going with a child theme. So I wanted to stop and take a look at the child theme that I have set up. Last time I showed you guys that I use local by Flywheel for local development, and I showed you that I had a boilerplate website that I use for creating all of my websites from scratch. So I'm gonna just, I don't know why it went there. Okay, I'm gonna flip over to here. Here's my boilerplate site, and I'm gonna go on down the rabbit hole here. And here you can see I have Divi theme, and then I have my Divi child theme. So when I click into there, here's my structure. I have a style.css, which is my overall styling for the child theme. I have another CSS file that I've put in there for styling the login page. I have my screenshot. I have my JavaScript folder where I have some scripts that are firing for the whole site, as well as some scripts I have in place for just the admin backend pages for some things I'm doing there. And then I have my functions PHP. So what's nice is when I load this up, for instance, here's my style sheet, and I already have it. If you learn more about child themes, there's some certain information that you would put up here, but you can see that I already have structures in place. I always want all my style sheets to start off with some color and font information as reference. Then I have some Divi default changes that I start all my websites with. For instance, I make sure all my sites have their rows widened to 90% on tablet and lower. Where's the, for some reason with Divi, their unordered lists have just weird padding by default. So I just go in and I write this rule for myself for lists ahead of time. So every time I load up a site, I know that's taken care of already. Then I create some utility classes for myself so I can add flex, so I can use Flexbox under different circumstances. Sometimes I only want to use it on desktop with Divi. Sometimes I want to just use it on tablet, or I want it to wrap on tablet. Sometimes I don't. So I use these utility classes, and that's just all set up for myself. So that's the benefit of having this custom CSS in here. Even like table press, if you use that plugin, I have code already in here for myself for certain things with table press. So that's just ready to go if I use that plugin. And we'll come back and look more at this in a little bit when I talk about CSS structure. You can see I have my login styling page. I have all this stuff just set up. So all I got to do is come in here and change colors and change like the URL for the image that's used as like the home image. But it just makes it really easy and fast to style somebody's homepage instead of using a plugin. With my functions PHP, open up. Okay, you can see how I'm using all these comments in here. Here's where I'm on queuing my child theme styles and scripts. And then I put another comment. I'm on queuing my child theme main CSS, my login CSS, my main script, my admin script. I'm just utilizing all of these comments to organize for myself so I know where everything is. Here's where I'm controlling the order of the menu items in my admin menu. Here is where I'm blocking username discovery through enumeration, login error messages, and a JSON REST direction that they'll use. So 3 different methods that I've just discovered to help me prevent people from discovering usernames. I just get those in place so that every single website that gets launched, that's already in place, and I don't have to ask my host to do that for me. And then you can even see here, I prevented WordPress's lazy load. You might be like, why would you want to prevent that? Well, not too long ago, there was a Divi theme update that their parallax sections didn't work right with WordPress lazy load. And if an image got lazy loaded after the parallax section was calculated what height it would be, it caused the section to like collapse and mess up. And I discovered that, brought it to their attention, and they recognized it. So now I just turn WordPress lazy load off until I know everything is working appropriately with it. So you should see the benefit there of having this type of child theme in place, all of that work that just gets done for you, and you just can keep adding to it over time. One other thing I'll show you with this, in here, this is my, I would say it's not 100% perfect, but this is code that over time I've discovered to make parallax work on mobile with Divi. I don't know why they haven't added that in as an ability, but after looking through articles and stuff, was able to figure this out, and it works for the most part. But it's cool that I have that in my child theme, and every site I know that I make gets this code, and parallax can work on mobile. So child themes, super important, tons you can do with them, tons of ways you can customize your websites, and just a really great thing for you to consider looking into, especially if it's as simple as going to a website and downloading one. But if you don't trust it, check out the code for yourself before you install it, okay? So technique 2, using custom CSS. This is another big one. I did want to just start with a disclaimer. You don't have to use custom CSS with Divi. If you don't know CSS or you're not comfortable with it, you can use all of Divi's built-in controls to get the website to a certain point of customizability. But if you really want to tweak it to perfection and kind of break outside of some of their normal styling, CSS really comes in handy. It's going to allow you to break outside of a lot of their limitations. Like with the unordered list that I mentioned, it's going to help you overcome some of their default style choices that leave you just wondering, why would they style it like that? You'll be able to use custom CSS using classes to affect styling across your entire site in certain instances from one central location. So you'll go to one style sheet and change something for a class, and then it's going to change that across your website wherever that class is being used. It's going to help you stand out from all of the sea of Divi websites that aren't using any type of customization and they're just dropping blocks in place and doing minimal styling. Again, you're going to know those sites as soon as you see them. There's a lot of times where I've showed people sites that I've made, and while they're not crazy stuff overlapping, it's hard for people to know that it was made using Divi because this just allows you to fine tune it. And then this is what's going to be needed, I think, to truly make a Divi site mobile responsive across device widths. So I do want to emphasize again, use Divi's options as much as you can. At the beginning, I never used any of these. I actually did classes and IDs and did all my styling in a child theme. And eventually it just became a nightmare until I started just embracing, I have to use these and I have to figure out a way to use it so I can keep it organized. And as they've come out with more features, it's making it easier to do that responsibly. But in those situations where you need that extra customization, you got to put your CSS somewhere. So obviously, where do you add it? Divi provides you three major areas for you to put your CSS. First, you've got the Divi theme options general page. The CSS in this box is going to affect the entire website, and it's going to be just like the CSS that you add into your child theme. The problem is you've got a small workspace and you're not getting all the features of a text editor like code completion and linting where it checks for errors. You're not going to have search and replace. So it's very much just a space where you can put your CSS. You can also put your CSS into an individual page, and the CSS you put there only affects that page. This has the same cons as the Divi theme options CSS location, and it also just adds in that aspect of poor organization. As you start spreading your CSS around to all sorts of different places, you're going to forget where the CSS was put. And sometimes you're going to be styling things and it's not going to be working. And you're like, why isn't this working? And it's because you don't realize you have this random line of CSS in a little box on the page. And then you can add CSS in the advanced tab of an individual element, whether that be a section, a row, or a module. And the CSS here only affects this element. It's the same cons as the two previous locations, but also really pointing out you can't target every element in the structure. You can't add custom media queries. You can't target all the pseudo elements. You can't use selector specificity. You're just kind of limited to what this box allows you to target. So with all of that being said, I obviously suggest that you really try to put all of your custom CSS into your child theme. That's going to allow you to utilize a text editor with lots of features and functionality that help you code faster and more accurately. You've got more screen space. You can more easily use comments. You can add media queries. You're able to use selector specificity and really get at every element within the DOM that's created on your Divi pages. You're able to create rules for classes that affect things across your website. And really the big thing is you have one place to come and add, update, and handle all of your CSS rather than having to constantly think about, do I have CSS on this page? Did I put it in this module? Now I have to go over here and check if it's in this module, and it just gets really confusing very quickly. So don't spread yourself super wide like that. See if you can narrow down and have it just here. So now I'm going to hit you with some CSS pro tips, which is just a fancy way of talking about fundamentals because they make me sound cooler than I really am. So I'm going to reveal these one at a time and then flip over into some examples that I wanted to show you in my boilerplate site. So tip number one, use a consistent structure for your entire CSS file, okay? So if we take a look at my CSS file, you can see that I use this structure right here to identify a major section within my CSS. And the nice thing about that is I can look over into this little mini map over here, and I can very easily see, oh, here's another main section, here's another main section, and I can grab that and go down very quickly and look around my CSS. If you don't have any type of sectioning like this, it just all becomes hundreds or thousands of lines of CSS that has no apparent structure. Plus, when I'm like, oh, I need to write code for my header. Well, I come up here, and this is where I put my header styling. This is where I put my footer styling. This is where I put styling for forms. Then if I have page-specific styles, they go under here. And then you notice that I have a specific structure that I create using CSS comments for an individual page. And that just really makes it so that my CSS, the bigger it gets, continues to stay organized. I even have rules that I set for myself where after a major section like this, I have exactly 5 entries before I put my next rule. And if I have something like this, I do 3 entries after that. And that just, I always go through and I keep my CSS updated, I keep it structured, and every single website that I work on has that exact same structure. Another structural piece that I work on, you can see here, is I'll use these comments as brackets to tell myself, hey, here's the beginning of me styling this thing, and here's the end of me styling this thing. So if something is really complicated or I'm using certain media queries, I'll put them all between these brackets, and that lets me know from here to here, this is what I'm focused on. So major sections, subsections, and then you can see right here, mobile styling of tables on phone. And here's all my code for mobile styling my tables from TablePress on the phone. So I kind of have 3 main layers of my structure. So very similar to that, use comments for future you. Okay, future you will be so thankful that you just filled this thing up with comments. And I don't know, you might have a different viewpoint than mine. Maybe you think that filling your CSS up with a bunch of comments is kind of like adding a whole bunch of code to your CSS. But I can't tell you how many times I haven't worked on something for a month or 2 months, and then I come back and my comments have saved my butt. As well as future contractors who come into your code and they're like, why did they do this? Well, when you have comments in there, it tells them why you did it. I don't know why there's like a duplicate of that. So like you can see here, widen rows to 90% on mobile. Boom, we know exactly what that code is there for. Padding for bulleted lists only if they are the last child. Okay, I know exactly what that's there for. And somebody can very easily see, and I don't do it for every single one, but they can very easily see why I'm putting this code there, what its function is, and that just helps them know, even if I change this, how is that going to impact the site? How many times have you hit a piece of code and you're like, I don't know what this is affecting or why it's here. Do I just delete it and then check on the front end to see what it does? Comments can really help you out there. Use a consistent naming system for classes and IDs. I personally enjoy using what's called BEM naming for classes. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of that, but when I discovered BEM, that just really changed the game for me with, sorry, I'm trying to resize so I can see more. BEM really changed the game for me with naming CSS classes, and basically that's block element modifier. So I put an example here, like if you were making a blurb and you called it a card, the overall structure is the block, card. Then the element might be a button within that blurb. So it's underscore underscore button, and then we have dash dash blue. So this is the card, and I'm focusing on the button, and I'm focusing on the blue version of the button. And that really helps you have a consistent naming scheme and one that is very detailed. So if I can show you over here, just so you can see it typed, I would put block, then underscore underscore element dash dash modifier. So in Divi at times, I'll do this where I add, like if I want to create classes that kind of cascade through a block that I've created, I might be like, I might add dot in whatever I want to call the section. Let's say it's subtitle section. That's my block. Then the row is going to get subtitle. I am not typing well. Subtitle section. That's my block. Now the element is content row. And then if it's a specific type of row or a modified row, I have subtitle section underscore underscore content row, and then dash dash, let's say restricted. Like maybe I have a version of the row that's full width, and then I have a version of the row that is 600 pixels wide. And I could even do that. I could say 600 pixels wide. And so you can see how those classes aren't just random anymore. You're forced to describe them. You're forced to create a structure with them. And now you have something that can be consistently used, especially through complex blocks that you build within Divi. So if you've never heard of BEM naming, definitely go check that out and figure out how you can utilize that wisely with Divi. I'm gonna leave that there for now. For IDs, I choose to use camel case. And that's something I want to point out. There's tons of different methods out there for doing this. If you look up CSS naming system, you're probably going to get like 6 different naming systems you could go read about all night. I've chosen to use BEM. That's how I've refined my techniques. I made a decision and I stick with it. With IDs, I use camel case. And you can see my example there. Your first word is all lowercase, and every word after that, without spaces, starts with a capital letter. So when I write an ID in Divi, I always start with a lowercase word, and then the next word starts with a capital, and then the next word starts with a capital, and so on and so forth with no spaces. That's how I always handle every ID, no questions asked. Another thing that I choose to do with my CSS is I start every class and ID typically with a 3-letter abbreviation that represents our company. So for us, it's Peculiar Pxl. So I start every class and ID with Pxl. So if we come back over here, here's my subtitle section. I would actually start this PXL dash subtitle section. And all of these would be PXL as well. Why is that? That's because every time I go into my code, when I see PXL in front of a class or an ID, I know who put that code there. That was us. And that is related to a change that we made. And it's kind of our signature within their code. You may have seen this as well if you've ever received code from a developer online and they start the code with like an abbreviation of their company. That's what they're doing. The other reason that this helps is that it helps prevent you from having any conflicts with Divi's existing class systems. So if you just said dot section, well, guess what? Divi already uses section as a class name. So you're going to have an issue there. But if I put PXL in front of that dash section, now I don't have an issue and it's unique. So definitely adding some type of signature abbreviation at the beginning of your classes and IDs actually is a big help. And how cool is it? These little tiny tweaks like that just make life so much easier. Definitely use the inspector to identify selectors and test and troubleshoot your CSS. If you're not using the inspector in Chrome or Safari or whatever browser you're using, you really need to start figuring out how to use that if you want to customize your sites. That's going to help you figure out every single Divi selector, how things are structured, and you just start really learning the structure of their code, which really comes in handy. At the beginning of using Divi, it took me forever to write CSS because I just didn't know how they structured it. But because I spent the time in the inspector over years, I now know how they structure their code. Some of the selectors I just know off the top of my head, but I can always go into the inspector and even just copy selectors straight from there and paste them into my CSS. A big thing here, if you can, avoid important tags with selector specificity. And I gave you an example here. Doubling up on classes is more specific than just .class. And you're gonna have a lot of situations in Divi where you write some custom CSS and you're wondering, why isn't this working? And it's because the rule that they've created is more specific than yours, even though yours maybe comes later in the flow of rules. So you have to overcome their specificity. And a lot of times I see tutorials online where people are just throwing the important tags in there. The problem that this creates is later on with you or another contractor, you're having a hard time overcoming your own important tags. So that's where you have to start adding some specificity. So, you know, for example, if you have like .et pb section is a selector that Divi uses a lot of times, but you've added your own custom class. Now I could double up and say pxl section. And that's one way that I've been able to increase the specificity of my selector. Or if I'm trying to get to something that's nested within my section, now I can say .et pb row dot, I don't know, I'm going to just make this up, inner text module. And so now I'm only affecting this inner text module if it's nested within the section that has this custom class I've added to it. And so that specificity not only allows me to overcome their rules, but allows me to really get targeted with what my CSS rules are affecting. I have one more. Okay, learn to use Flexbox for better control of your Divi layouts. I haven't tried to mess with grid at all with Divi. I don't know if I can, maybe I can, but I've really gotten into using Flexbox to very easily make things stay horizontally aligned or wrap differently in Divi quite easily, honestly, once you figure out the nature of how Flexbox works. I'm obviously not going to go into a whole tutorial here of how to use Flexbox, but go to CSS Tricks or W3 Schools or go to any YouTube video and start figuring that out, because that's going to allow you to really customize your layouts, but that's going to require a good bit of custom CSS. So those are my pro tips with custom CSS. I know that's a lot to take in there. Definitely go back and take a look at that. Look those things up on YouTube, and you're going to find a ton of people's methods that they follow for that. Okay, let me get a drink. Okay, technique number 3. I've really been stepping into the Divi preset feature. I don't know those of you out there that have been utilizing it. When it first came out, I jumped all over it. I did get burned the very first time that they released it because I set up a bunch of presets and then they like randomly disappeared. And I was kind of salty at Elegant Themes for a little bit because I had to go back and redo a bunch of work. But then I gave it a second go and they've been really stable on me. And the presets have just been a game changer when I am building blocks prior to building the actual pages for my client websites. Okay, so their preset feature is basically a way of setting global default styles within the builder. And it allows you to roll out your design changes and settings across your site, across pages very quickly and easily. It's very reminiscent of CSS classes, but it's not CSS classes. I think I might address this in a little bit. Basically, you're making a preset and you're saying this preset has all of these styles, and then any similar element that you apply that preset to, it takes on all of those styles. And then you can change that in one location and it changes anywhere that that preset is applied. So I hope that can show you the power and the speed that that could come with. It just really changes up the way you use this tool. So it allows you to create a consistent design You're moving faster through your development because you're not having to style each element. You're not having to worry about extending styles. You're just assigning a preset. You're affecting things across your entire site. And once you have one type of preset, you can use that to very easily make alternate versions of that preset. And that's how I like approach buttons. I make one button preset and then I apply that to all of the other buttons to get different unique presets. So a lot of flexibility and power here. First thing I would tell you with presets is you can add presets to sections, you can add them to rows, and you can add them to modules. Those are the obvious places that you can create presets for. You know, if you have a section and you're adding the same padding or certain styling to it all the time, make presets for that. But another layer down, if you haven't thought of it, you can make presets for columns, and you can make presets for things like the social network, where it's a module that has other pieces within it, where you can add Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and then you can put individual styling onto that. Or think about the contact form, where you can add a form field, and then you can style that individual form field. You can make presets even for that. I use presets for columns all the time, since I use Flexbox to create rows that don't stack on tablet and instead stay horizontally aligned. I'll create presets for my columns, so then I can just load blocks that have those stylings in place already. And it just makes it a lot easier to load up these rows and columns that don't stack until it's the phone. But another thing that I've really been experimenting with is using a series of presets. So you can see on the screen here how I made a block that I called my subpage title section. And so I've got my section, then I've got my title content container, which is my row. And inside of that, I've got an icon, a title, and a button. So then on the back end, what I've done is I created a preset for this section, for this row, for this icon, the title, and the call to action button. And I even I think of it almost like BEM, you know, naming for CSS. This is my block. This is my element. This is an element. This is an element. And this is an element. And so I create a preset for every single one of those and make all of their names very similar. That way, I'm able to just go into the preset for this block and change all of them and change that block across my entire website. So it's, you know, they're not allowing you to create CSS classes like Oxygen Builder might. So again, it's one of those situations that it is the tool that it is. So they give me presets. So what I do is I make presets that are tied in together essentially. And I can just change all of them in one spot, and that block is changed across the entire website. So when you start building presets with other presets in mind that are in the same block, that really helps you to speed up your design process and your maintenance process. So some pro tips for the preset. Only use them on things you plan to use multiple times and in multiple locations. Obviously, if you're creating something that is ultra unique, maybe you don't need a preset for that right now. You might later, but just let it go for now. But if it's like something I showed you on the last page where it's a title section and I know I'm going to use it multiple times, I'm going to create presets for that. Build them as you build your style guide and library blocks. So if I come over to, here's my Families Matter local site that I showed you guys. And I'll come into my test page. I'm going to open this up in a new tab and then open up the front end in a new tab. And now you play the waiting game. Oh, okay, so here's all the blocks that I made for this site. As I went through and I made all these blocks, I made my presets as I went along. And so by the time I was done building all of these blocks, the majority of my presets were all in place. So when I went into the pages afterwards and I started building new things, I already had the presets in place and I was able to utilize them in new ways as well. So I just went on down the line with each one and set the presets as I went. Similar to that, unless you're using a preset as a starting point, completely style, this is what I do, completely style your element or your block first, then go back and create your presets for the pieces. So I put a section, I put a row, I got everything exactly how I wanted it to be. Then I went back and I figured out, what do I want to create a preset for? And so that just kind of gave me the clarity to be like, do I need this section to be a preset? No, I don't need it to be a preset. And so I let that go. So if you just build all of this and style it all first, then that gives you clarity at the end to be like, do I really need to make this as a preset? Rather than setting it as a preset first and then trying to style it in the preset back end, it's just easier to style it as an individual element first. Use a helpful and descriptive naming scheme for yourself. Just like with CSS, this is going to help you to more easily identify what is this preset applied to and what does it have to deal with. So I wonder if I can, I'll see if I if I followed my own rules and had something helpful for this section here. So if I come in, you can see in the back end, I'm always putting descriptors here. So we have image with text section. Let me see there. Success message. Yeah. So image with text section. And I open that up, and then I have image with left container, image with text right container. So everything is nicely identified for me. And if I go in here, you can see I have my preset image with text left row. So I know it's a row, and I know it's an image with a text on the left. Whereas this one over here, image with text, right row. And when I'm loading these presets up and I click in here and I go in, because they're just going to stack and they're going to keep adding, my naming scheme allows me to very quickly remember, oh yeah, that's what this is. And the same thing can even happen in your CSS. You're making all these classes. Well, just because you did that doesn't mean you're going to remember what all those classes are. You need a good naming scheme so you are able to remember and kind of figure it out later on. So that's the same thing I'm doing with all of these preset naming schemes. Now let me figure out, here we go. Okay. When appropriate, exclude settings that tend to change from use to use. It's going to be tempting to include everything in your preset, but I try to be aware of what are the things that I'm going to be most likely to change whenever I utilize this element. Like I might plop something on a page and decide I want it to be pushed 40 pixels to the left or 40 pixels to the right. Unless I'm going to have, you know, a structure like this where I know I have this one's on the right and this one's on the left, if I'm not exactly sure how I'm going to move something in vertical space, most likely vertical space, I'll leave that vertical spacing out of the preset so that I can just change it on an individual basis. If you didn't know, you can apply a preset and then you can further change the style on that individual instance. So I try to pay attention to the things that are most likely to change, like background image. I won't set a background image because I'm probably going to change that from section to section. There's other things about the section that I'm going to set, but the background image, because it changes a lot, I leave that out. And I really do go through when I'm making the preset, I evaluate every change that I made and I'm like, is this something that I need to be in the preset? No, then I'm going to leave it out. And I start removing changes until I get to the basic element, save it, then I make the individual changes. This is a key part once you start using the presets. Before you update styling on anything, be sure to check if you have a preset applied and think, do I want to make the change to the preset or just this individual element? So if I'm coming into this row on another page and not this block page, and I'm making changes to my headline, I've got to stop first and look up here. Do I have a preset? Oh, no, I don't. Okay, so I can change things. You know, but if I'm in this row and I start changing things here that I actually meant to change in the preset, well, now they're not getting added to the preset, they're getting added to the individual element. So that's a little nuance that you have to keep in mind is, first thing, I open this up, is there a preset? If it's a yes, do I want to change the preset? If so, I click in here. I can never remember if it's the pencil or the gear. It's the pencil. And now I can go in and change things in this row. So that's a big check that you have to make sure you take before you start changing things once you have presets applied. And my last tip with this, I believe my last tip with this is, I recently discovered this. Don't forget to use right-click options for conveniently updating your presets. So for instance, I don't know if I have a preset on this. Okay, yeah, image with text left image. So you can see naming scheme. I had image with text left row. Well, this one is image with text left image, so that they're all tied in together. So if I go in here and now I don't want to make my changes in the preset, I can come right here into this interface and say force full width. And I can right click here and say apply style to active preset. And if I click yes, now it'll apply it. So I don't have to actually go into the preset every single time. If all I'm changing is one little style, I can use a right click option and force that onto the preset very easily, which is a really nice feature to speed it up just a second or two in your development time. Cool. All right, so that's what I have to say about presets. Definitely go check out Elegant Themes documentation about this. This is something that once you figure out how you want to use it, it really has changed the game with how I am designing with them and the speed at which I'm designing. I did want to point out some shortcomings. Presets are specific to the element type you build them for. So if you make a preset for a button module, don't expect that preset to apply to a button within a contact form, for instance. You're going to have to style that separately still. So that is an issue that exists here. Unfortunately, presets don't apply across different types of elements. You also can't yet stack or combine presets like you can with CSS classes. So with CSS classes, something that's nice is you could make just a default button class and you could apply certain styles to that. Then you could make a button blue and all you have to add to that is the change in color. And it's using both of those CSS classes. Divi presets don't work like that. You can't have a default preset and then combine that with a blue preset and have them work on one another. You can only apply one preset at a time. Sometimes the CSS that you place in an Elements Advanced tab, again, I recommend against that, but if you are doing that, I've noticed that that won't save to the preset sometimes. So you got to go back and double check your preset and make sure all of your modifications went to it. And then finally, and this is a big thing that I've brought up to Elegant Themes numerous times, if you create a really long list of presets, for any one element type, the list will end up extending past the viewport of your device and you can't scroll. So you can see over here in this image how the list of presets is going beyond the viewport. Once that happens, you can't scroll. And I reached out to them and I told them, hey guys, I can't access my presets beyond the screen. Like, what's going on here? And I was like, here's the CSS that you need to add. Please add this so I can scroll it. And they're like, you know, the message, it's like, our developers are prioritizing and we're, and it just hasn't been updated. And it's like a few lines of code and it's fixed. And I don't understand why, but the way around that would be, I think if I can remember correctly, let me open up one that I have a lot of them on. So if it's like this, what I do, I think, is I open it up. how do I do this? I'm sorry, I'm like trying to remember here. No, I can't zoom out. So I try to, did they change something here? There's a way, it's failing on me right now, but I open the inspector and then I use responsive mode to widen the screen a ton. And so then I'm like way zoomed out, but you widen the screen a ton and then it reveals them and I click them and I can apply them. So I have no idea why they haven't just instituted a simple little fix for that. But that tends to be their operating or their MO at times. They release a feature, they immediately recognize there's a bug and then they just don't do anything about it. So that is one of them right there. So there you go. Elegant themes, if you're watching, take care of it. All right, this one's a quick one. Using the Divi library. We talked about this a ton in the last meetup, but this is your space for saving modules, layouts, sections, rows, all sorts of stuff. This is where you'll create your toolkit of blocks that you're going to pull from for all of your pages. This is critical for keeping your design consistent, for building quickly, for having just your central location for managing all of your blocks from your website, and you can even use it as somewhat of a backup option. Okay, so here would be my tips with this one. At this point, because presets have been introduced, save sections and rows with modules. If a section doesn't have any modules in it, I would say don't bother saving it because you have presets that you can apply now. You can load up a section, apply a preset, and it's taken care of. The same with a row. But if you've got a block that you've created of a section, a row, and modules and columns, and you're doing all sorts of custom stuff in it, that's when I would save that to the library. You can also save entire layouts. So if you've got a whole page that you want to back up before you kind of experiment with things, just save it to the library. I'll put like 02, 16, 21 about page and save it to the library. And that way I know this was the page before I messed with it on this date. Also, before I launch a site and give it over to a client, I'll take a library backup of every single page. So if they mess something up, I can just load it from the library. I also obviously have my external backup options, but that's something that's right in the builder. As for generic layouts, now that I know a little bit more about custom post types, if it's something that's the same structure all the time, you might want to be using the theme builder for that rather than the library. That would probably be more older school Divi when the theme builder wasn't introduced. As I keep saying in every one of these tips, use a clear and descriptive naming system. You can see over in this site, discard and exit. Even though it will mark the type as row and section over here, I like to start all of my library elements off with a 3-letter abbreviation for if they are a section or a row or a module. That way, as soon as I open it up, right on the left side, they're all organized alphabetically and chunked together. So I know all of my rows are together. I know all of my sections are together. And module, I might use MDL or something. And they're all going to be right there. And then again, 2-column article row. I know what that means for this. 3-column icon highlight row. Just be descriptive with it so that you know later on when you're picking these, what it is that you're picking. Now, that being said, there is a downfall with the library, and it's very similar. It's very similar to the presets. And that's that Divi presents you with this modal to pick your library items, but they don't let the text wrap. And so the text gets cut off after like 20 characters. And I've reached out to them and I'm like, hey guys, just let the text wrap. And they're like, yeah, this is a known bug. And I'm like, the library has been around for years. Like, just update it. I don't understand. So unfortunately, you either have to know your library names or you just have to pick things, and some of it's like process of elimination. Oh, it wasn't that one, pick the next one. Oh, it wasn't that one. It's kind of frustrating, but you know, it's one of those, it's like a family member that you can't stand, but you love at the same time. So that's your Divi library, still a great tool for you. All right, technique 5, Divi's efficiency features. This has kind of been their like go-to for the last year of development. They just keep hitting on these efficiency features, which I love. At the same time, I wish they would go back and start expanding some of their modules. But they just added like the global colors thing, which is huge. But you know, these efficiency features are going to make everything faster, consistent, enjoyable. They can also be a game changer with how you build with Divi, especially future updates and tweaks. Now, as I started to put the list together for all of the efficiency features that they released, it made me think of this great moment from The Office where Michael is faced with having to choose what he wants on his pretzel, and he just says, "Give me everything." So I was like, man, I'm not going to talk about all these things. So I'm just going to focus on my main 4. Actually, I think I have a bonus in there, but my main 4 would be modified styles filter, search options, wireframe mode, and copy and paste. So even though I use the visual builder much more than I used to, I still heavily rely on wireframe mode. I feel like it gives me better conceptualization of the overall structure of the page. I feel like it also results in more accurate and faster interface interactions. I'm not wasting time fighting against the visual builder to get to a button, and then I have to open up the layers panel and open up sections and columns. Though that is helpful, I can just go here and very quickly get to what I want to get to. Also, you know, when you're in the visual builder and you have items disabled, now you've got a big chunk of your visual builder that's just this big grayed out section that just kind of like interrupts me personally, my context for how the page is coming together. And depending on how much you're using custom CSS, PHP, and JavaScript in your child theme, the wireframe mode just becomes more and more essential. Like, I know that they're really trying to get the visual builder to be all encompassing, but as I do Flexbox and other custom things, it just ignores it and doesn't do anything. So I have to keep relying on the wireframe mode, which is okay with me. And it's nice that it's available on the front and back end builders. So if you haven't spent much time in wireframe mode, I would suggest it. You have to definitely use it together with your web browser. But when you do, to me, it just creates a much more reliable and accurate system. Search options bar. If you haven't really been using this, it just shaves off seconds of what you're doing. So let me, show you, what did I want to show you here? Divi efficiency playground site. Okay, so I'm going to come over to this other site testing page. Okay. Thanks guys for sticking with me. I know this is a ton of information and I'm just like gabbing and going, but hopefully there's just like, well, like I said, one thing that just steps out at you that just is like, I'm going to try that. All right, so obviously one thing you can do is if you're going to add an element, instead of scrolling down through all these, you can just be like image and it pops up. And it seems like that's barely anything, but when you start consistently shaving off seconds from searching for stuff, it really adds up. Then if I like go into this icon, I can search for padding and boom, it pulls up that styling feature. So otherwise, you've got to load this up, click design, click spacing, there's padding. Or if you know all you want is padding, type it in and boom, there it is. Then when you put this together with, I just discovered this right click option, go to option. So you can search padding, click go to option, and now it takes you right to that section within the builder interface. And it just helps you fly to these pieces instead of scrolling around looking for them. Let me see if I had anything else to say about that one, yep, go to option, definitely use that. So that's a quick one. This is my definite #1 efficiency feature, modified styles. If you're an Elementor user, maybe there's a way. I've only had to use Elementor. I know, Renee, you mentioned it. I've only had to use it on one of our client projects. I know that there's certain things Elementor does that I'm just like, come on, Divi, can't you start doing some of these things that Elementor is doing? But at the same time, I just can't get used to Elementor's interface. It's just not as efficient to me. It's not as inspiring to me. And this modified styles is a huge game changer for me. So like I come into here and I'm like, icon, what did I do to this icon? Modified styles. Oh, I didn't change anything about it. Okay, great. I think that's because I have my presets applied. Am I on the wrong page? Families matter, playground. I think I'm on the wrong page. I wanted to show you another thing. Test page, yeah, that's what I want. Are we gonna get the double load? Oh, we're good. Okay, so if I come in here, career archive title, and let me go into my preset just to be safe. And I click on this and I'm like, what did I change about this preset? Instead of having to hunt around and be like, okay, did I change this? No, I didn't change anything there. What about, okay, I changed spacing here. And I have to hunt around like I've experienced with Elementor. I can just click filter, modified styles. And it shows me in one window everything that I've changed about this element. And then I can just change those things or get rid of them all from that one space. This has been the biggest efficiency feature by far that I use over and over and over again with every element. And so again, all you have to do is filter, modified styles. And then on top of that, you can then type in padding and it filters it down even further. And you can just really filter down into the changes that you've made. Maybe there's a way to do that with Elementor and I've missed it. If so, I apologize. But I get into stuff and I'm like, what did I do with this? And then I have to search around and around and I'm like, okay, this wasn't changed. How is this doing this? And then again, I can just click go to option, boom, and it takes me right there. Big game changer, though it seems like a small feature. Copy and paste within a page or even between a page. You know, if I'm like, oh, I want this divider, I can just use Command C on my Mac, hover over this, Command V, boom, it's pasted. Maybe my client site is on an old Elementor and it's not working, but I can't get the keyboard shortcuts to work appropriately. Divi is pretty good about these keyboard shortcuts. And it's just amazing to me that I can copy this and just paste it and all this structure is created. And then obviously, you can copy this divider, open up another page and paste it onto that other page. That's a huge efficiency feature as well. And then one bonus thing I wanted to talk about was using disable elements. Obviously, sorry if I say obviously a lot, I think that's like my thing. You can disable elements if you want to show them on desktop but not mobile. But how I use disable elements is for testing. So if I'm like, hey, I want to mess around with this section, the first thing I'll do is duplicate it. And then I'll say original. And then I'll come in here and say test. And then I'll disable this like that. And now I'll do all of my tests and messing around on this test section. And if in the end I'm like, yeah, this is good, I'll take test off and this is the new section and I'll delete this one. Otherwise, if I'm like, nah, I didn't like those changes, I like the original one, I'll delete this and re-enable this section. And now nobody knows that I was kind of playing around in that section. So that's just a little bonus for you of a way that you can kind of mess around with things without sacrificing your original piece. If you're like, oh, I want to mess around with styles, but how am I going to remember what to get back to? Just go ahead and duplicate, disable, and mess around with your new copy.
Mark, I just want to pause you real quick. So we're at like 8:30. So I just
Yeah.
want to make sure that you're good on time.
Oh man.
Okay, so that we're
I'm
not
so
going to
sorry.
dive over 9 o'clock. Okay, all good.
There's so many things. Goodness.
I know. I looked at the rest of your slides and I'm like, this is going to be interesting. So just, maybe less show and whatever you think, however you want to get through it. If people have to drop off at 9 too, if you want to keep going, happy to keep going. We can just record it and people can catch the end of it another time.
Yeah.
But just want to give you a heads up. That's all.
Thanks so much, Renee. Yeah. Sorry, everybody. I'm like getting into it, I guess. Yeah, check out the Elegant Themes documentation for more on all of these features. So custom post types, fields, and dynamic content and templates, obviously want to hit on that because that was something that was brought up in the last one. I would think of the remaining things, that's probably one of the more important ones. But custom post types, those are really just a regular post with a different post type value. So you have a post, but a page really is a custom post type, or in Divi, a project, an attachment, and then you can start making your own career, movie, property, etc. Then you can create custom fields where you can enter input into those fields on those custom post types, and that's going to give you the data that gets populated into the post type. Now with Divi, they've introduced dynamic content where you can specify in the custom post type what input you want to be added in there, or what custom field you want to be added in there. And then you can use the theme builder to build templates that help you display all of that dynamic content. Okay, so it kind of creates this whole system. So what I did in my experimentation was I created a custom post type called careers. So I'm going to be working on a website for a pharmacy company that has career or jobs that they're hiring. So I created a custom post type called careers. Then for careers, I created custom fields like job description, job responsibilities, pay, all those things, and associated them with that custom post type. Then I use the theme builder to build a page template that takes all of those custom fields and drops them into a design. And the key thing is that all of those careers are using the same page structure, the same design, and the same type of data. So they can share one template where all of that information gets added into the same spots. So why is this good? It's creating a workflow for creating posts that have all the same layout and basic content. The details might change, but the overall layout doesn't. So now you've got a workflow that allows you to repeat those in an easy fashion. And it also makes it easier for your clients to make updates to those types of posts. So if you know all of these different languages, you can kind of create this thing yourself. And if you can, that's amazing. But for the rest of us, like Andy Dufresne over here, there's plugins out there that can help you step into this when you're just learning like I am. So I started listening to some podcasts on this after we had our meetup while I was working on some serving boards for my wife. I was just listening to custom post type stuff and ended up coming across something that maybe a lot of you use, Custom Post Types UI. That's a plugin that's going to allow you to make the custom post type. Advanced Custom Fields, which will allow you to make the custom fields. And then you're going to use Divi to make the templates that kind of bring those things together. So what I ended up doing was I created the custom post type for careers, created some custom taxonomies with it. There's a little caveat there with Divi. Then I created the custom field group, like the job description and the responsibilities and the pay, so on and so forth. And I said, take this custom field group and apply that to the careers post type. So those custom fields only show up on that post type. Then I added one complete entry for that custom post type. And once I did that, I built out my template on a test page using the visual builder. Then I saved that to my library and then went into the theme builder and loaded up that template into the theme builder, and then added my dynamic content and assigned that to that custom post type. So if I come back over here to my playground site, you can see right here, here's my custom post type that I created. So I'll go into the custom post type plugin, and you can see that I used it to create the careers custom post type. And I just went through all these fields and filled them out how I wanted this to be operating. Then I went into custom fields and created career details. And I made just a bunch of fields, job description, responsibilities. And this is really intuitive. I had no experience with this and just hopped in and did this stuff. So it's pretty straightforward. And I basically said this field group is only applied to the custom post type careers. So now when I go into one of these, you can see here's my custom fields, job description, responsibilities, all this stuff. And there's no editor, there's no builder. I turned them off. So a client only has to come into the back end and plop the information into these fields, hit update, and the theme builder is automatically going to apply a template that I created and format this stuff into the appropriate design. So if I come into the theme builder, you can see here that I created a template for all career custom post types, as well as one for the careers archive page. So let's take a look at that. This is for something else. So if I go into careers, this is my archive page, and I used a template in the theme builder to put this together, and it's pulling in all of my custom post types. Then if I go into this, I'm also using the theme builder to build this page, and it's pulling all of the custom field information into it. And every single one of these career pages is going to be the exact same minus the details of the information that's pulled in. So you can see how you make one template, and then all you have to do is fill in a form, and now it just starts making all of these pages for you instead of you having to make one individually and then go back later and update every one of them individually. You know, speaking of that, if your client comes back later and says, hey, these are awesome, but now that I see it, can you move the hours up? Can you change the button design? Can you add this new field? The nice thing is you don't have to go into every single one of those posts and change this. All you have to do is go and change your custom field group and change just the layout of your one template, and boom, that'll change it across all of your custom post type instances. So definitely go listen to some podcasts, watch some videos on this. It's really changing the way that I view how I would approach a Divi site, and I'm going to be looking into these more and more. You might want to turn off the Divi builder, obviously, if you've got a client that's going in there so that I don't accidentally overwrite your work. One thing that I discovered is when you're using dynamic content for something like a title that you want to be an H1 through 6 tag, they include the ability to add a before and after. You're going to have to use the heading tags or the headline tags, whatever you want to call them, in order to style them. If you don't do this, none of your Divi styling for headlines will work. You have to add these tags in there in the before and after positions in order for it to style. And also, they'll present you with an option to enable raw HTML. Remember over here in the careers, this was a big thing at first. I was like, how is this working? You can see in this one field type, I'm using like a text editor with a bulleted list. It wasn't showing up on the front end that way. It was just one big paragraph of text. You have to enable in the Divi builder this raw HTML in order for it to display the actual HTML structure. And this was a big thing. If you are making custom post types that you're going to want to come back to this slide and really look at this and go to this tutorial over here. But if you're using custom post types and you want to display them using the Divi blog module, the only thing that it allows you to do is to pick which custom post type you want to display. But for my instance, where I have careers, I could have some careers that are available and some that are no longer available because they've been filled. Well, what do I want to show? I only want to show the available positions, right? Unfortunately, Divi gave you the ability to select custom post types, but then they didn't give you the ability to select the custom taxonomies that you build with those custom post types. And I don't know why. They obviously have the technology to do that with posts. So why aren't they doing that? You know, they came out and they said, now you can pick custom post types, but you're not allowing me to pick the taxonomy, so it kind of doesn't matter. Thankfully, I came across this little snippet of code that this person had on their tutorial. And by adding that to my PHP or functions PHP, it's a little hack. But what you can basically do is set the post type in the blog module to posts. And if you've enabled default WordPress categories for your custom post types, they'll show up there, you pick them, and this loads your custom post types. So if I come over to, go away. If I come over to careers, this is an archive page. This is the blog module, and it's pulling in only my available career positions. You can see here that I actually have 4 of them, but one of them is closed, part-time prescription, and it's not showing up here. That's because I utilized categories in this code to create the closed and available categories. And instead of picking careers as the post type, I just picked posts and I picked the open category, and this hacking method is making those show up. So I really wish that they would have finished that feature. Hopefully they will in the future, but they've kind of been quiet on that for some reason. So come back here if you're really trying to do that and check this out. Okay. Renee, I'm fighting the time. Technique 7.
You're okay. I'm not going to cut you off. It's okay.
You guys, Renee was yelling at me before the class. She was telling me, if you go over 9 o'clock.
I didn't say that.
So optimizing for mobile. We all know everything's moving towards mobile. Over 50% of people are interacting with websites on mobile for the majority of the time. So you need to have your site optimized for that. Really optimizing for mobile is just making sure your Divi website is looking good across all sorts of different device widths, because you don't want to miss a potential lead backing out on your offer just because it's inconvenient to view your website. It's 2021, and I can't tell you how many clients we run into that their website is still shrunk down to fit into a screen, and you have to pinch and zoom. Yeah, so you know, it's making sure your Divi website fits in all those different device widths. So Divi obviously is helping you out right out of the gate. They're doing things like adding max widths using percentages to help things kind of be fluid. They'll stack your columns at a certain width. They'll even adjust vertical padding so that the vertical spacing is more conducive for a smaller screen size. And they obviously give you their interface for viewing tablet, desktop, and mobile, and they just released that new feature where you can change it fluidly. They obviously also let you change between those 3 device widths for basically all of their styles. And I do love that they came out with this. Not to harp on Elementor again, but as I've been in there, it's like they let you change the mobile styling on some things, and then other things they just don't. And I'm like, I'm so used to Divi letting you change the responsive settings on absolutely everything. Like, I'm probably wrong on this, but I was trying to like resize a section, and it was like you could set the max width for a section, but then you couldn't change the max width on different screen widths. And that was kind of confusing to me. So I will give it to Elegant Themes. They've introduced a lot of responsive options. But for me, the visual builder isn't always super accurate when I'm trying to go to the cell phone. I wish they would let you set breakpoints for tablet and phone, because I feel like their breakpoints are way too big and they make things stack at 980, which is just way too early for modern websites a lot of times. You can't set custom breakpoints in media queries. And sometimes the responsive default stylings that they include just don't make much sense to me. So that's where you have to start figuring out your own ways of going about optimizing. And I kind of broke this down into basics, next steps, and advanced. First thing, determine your minimum screen width that you design for. You know, if you're working with a client, you might tell them, hey, I only design down to 375 pixels. I've seen even agencies that are like, we don't design for Internet Explorer. That's just part of our contract. You can take it or leave it. So you want to decide what's the minimum screen size you go down to. And then once you know that, you know to check that screen size. And if it's good there, you're good for your minimum. Another basic, increase your content width. Elegant Themes sets it to 1080 by default. Modern sites and modern devices can go wider. I usually start my sites at a minimum of 1,140 pixels on desktop, and I increase it from 80% max width to 90% max width on tablet and phone. You can see from this picture here the difference that that makes, how much space that gives you for text. And I'm doing that through custom CSS. My suggestion, the thing that I follow, is I create a section on the desktop view, and then I optimize all of its mobile settings before I move on to the next section. You could end up building all of your sections in the desktop view, then you have to go back and style for tablet, then you have to go back and style for mobile. If you just do all of that as you're going, it's going to make it feel more efficient, and you're focused on that section already. So just kind of batch your responsibilities and take care of that one section at a time. Again, for me, I stick with the wireframe mode and the inspector. If you're just relying completely upon Divi, the visual builder, you're going to try to style things and you're going to be left wondering, why isn't this doing anything? Why isn't this making any changes? You have to really be able to go into the inspector and look at the CSS and HTML and realize, oh, the code I'm adding in isn't working because they've added an important tag. And you wouldn't know that unless you're looking in the inspector. So definitely go in and use that to troubleshoot. It's going to open up a new world for you of understanding how Elegant Themes styles things on mobile. And final basics, quadruple check everything. Definitely, especially the vertical padding, between columns. Sometimes it's not always what you think it is, and things will butt up right next to one another. And I wanted to star this. Get good hosting. If you're concerned about how your site performs on mobile, a big part of that can be hosting. You know, I was just testing some of our Divi sites on Flywheel the other day, and I was getting 1.5 second load times. Like I was hitting enter and boom, the site's there. And it's just, they're an amazing host, and there's other amazing hosts out there as well. But if your site is really slow on mobile, it could also come down to hosting. So definitely check that out. When we're talking about mobile optimization next steps, these are just some tips that I thought of for you. Don't be afraid to experiment with larger text on mobile. It's kind of a design trend right now. I would say that 18 pixels is the new 16 pixels. You know, and headlines, big and bold headlines is a thing. It's not just, you know, people that are 90 years old that like to read big text. It's just easier for all of us to read big text on our small screens. And it ends up looking pretty stylish. Make use of changing your content on different device widths. This is an amazing thing that Divi allows you to do. You can see here in this instance, this is the secondary navigation menu I have on tablet, but this is what I did for it on the phone. I went in and took out some words so that it fits without having to just get rid of it or use a hamburger menu. Divi will do that a lot of times with their layouts. You're like, look at this cool header. And then on mobile, it's got like 3 hamburger menus. And you're like, what is this? Nobody would know how to use this. So try to experiment with changing the content across device widths. Disabling unnecessary elements as the screen size decreases. So if you've got 4 images on desktop, can you get away with just 2 on mobile so that they can scroll faster through stuff? That's something to consider. And then start using relative length units. So instead of pixels, percentage or viewport width or relative or rel or m or however you want to say them, that will adjust based on either the viewport or the width of the parent or the text size that you set as the base text size. And that way things are changing fluidly on your own without you always necessarily having to set different sizes at different breakpoints. Advanced, this is more custom CSS stuff. Start learning how to use media queries. These allow you to target any device width. So you can see here how this is the rule I include on all of my websites to widen the rows to 90% on mobile. So at max width 980, from there and down, I say make every row have a width of 90%, and boom, that changes every row across my website from 980 and down. There's all sorts of different types of approaches you can take with media queries where you can say, you know, from this screen size and up, from this screen size and down, between these 2 screen sizes. There's just so many ways you can combine these rules to really get specific for your custom sections. And then the other big thing I would suggest for you is learning Flexbox. So I do want to show you that. And I'm going to come to, I think it's my home page. And I'm going to go into the visual builder for this one and just show you, I'm going to show you with the CSS right in here in the builder. I wouldn't typically do it like this, but you can see here I have a row with 1 column and 3 buttons. And if I come into this row and go into the column and say display flex, just like that, now all my buttons are aligned with one another. And then if I say, now it's like escaping me, align items, space between, where is it? I'm forgetting. Boom, just like that. So justify content space between, now it spaces all of the buttons out like that. So you can see how if you're wondering, man, how do I take all these buttons and get them in line with one another? Oh, I guess I have to do inline block, and then I have to mess with margin and all sorts of stuff. If you start figuring out how to use Flexbox appropriately, it can make those types of changes much easier for you. And that's what I've been experimenting a lot with when it comes to things like trying to align elements or to get them to stay horizontal when I get to tablet. So there's tons of tutorials out there about Flexbox, and it's much simpler to get into than you think. So if you haven't tried yet, it's a great time to get into that. Okay, we're doing it. I don't know why I'm getting a warning here. I think I have a space in the wrong spot. The other thing that I wanted to point out was some mobile optimization concerns. It could be, you see this in elegant theme layouts a lot as well, where and not so much as of late as they used to. They'll create one section version for desktop, and then they'll create another version for mobile, which can seem helpful. But then if you forget to make changes to both sections, now you're like, oh, I made changes here, we're all good. And then you don't realize that on the mobile, it's completely different information. So you want to start to challenge yourself to learn how to use CSS and Flexbox, so you just have one version that's mobilely responsive, and you're not having to make like 3 different versions where you're constantly updating the information. Another thing to beware is that they'll use like different positioning a lot in their layouts, and it's like, look how cool, this image is overlapping this image. But you can see on this example here, I used relative positioning through Divi to make this image overlap this one. But then when we go to tablet, this image is hanging off the screen. And then if we go to phone, it's hanging off the screen even more. So not only does it look bad, but now your site may end up actually scrolling horizontally, and Google's going to be like, hey, what the heck is this? Your site's wider than the device width, and we don't like that. So you really have to know what you're doing when it comes to changing positioning. They try to make it seem simple with like putting it anywhere you want. And that's why, like, what is it? Wix uses absolute positioning, and they're like, you can put anything anywhere you want. But then when you go to different device widths, stuff is all over the place. And it just takes a ton of messing around with it. So beware of that. And that brings me to the pre-made layouts. There's a lot of good ideas out there, but just make sure you check them across device widths before you implement them, or else you're going to find yourself in that spot where you're going back and you're changing all sorts of stuff with them. Okay, we're doing it. Some go-to tools. Outside of Divi, figure out what are your tools that are your go-tos that you rely on, that you have right next to you while you're working with Divi, so you can pull content in and get tutorials and things like that. Here is a little grid of some things that I kind of always have right on hand when I'm either designing, needing some placeholder stuff, or working on some coding things. Obviously, Site Inspire and Elegant Themes are going to give you some great layout ideas. I use XD for making my wireframes. And yep, I use Grammarly for double checking all of my writing and making sure it's correct. It has saved my butt numerous times from some hilarious typing mistakes that I've made. Placeholder wise, some big things I want to point out is this Boom Online's lorem ipsum generator. If you've used lorem ipsum, it's great, but it can actually make it difficult to get good context for the site because it doesn't read like actual words. So this Boom lorem ipsum, you can type in something like WordPress and say, I want one paragraph as plain text. And then it goes and it finds that on Wikipedia. And now I can actually get words that make sense. So if a client is reading something, it just gives them a better feel for how the words spread out. So that's a really helpful tool. I just discovered this one and it is amazing, placeholder.com. So I don't design the stuff for our websites as far as like graphic design. I have a partner that does that. But when I'm just putting the website together and I just need some placeholder images, this website actually lets you, and it walks you through, you can take this URL and if you learn how to do this, you can put any image dimensions you want in and it'll automatically generate the image for you, and it'll put 150 by 150 on it. You can even put like text into it and it'll generate this box, and you can just download that image and load it into your Divi website as a placeholder. It's super, super helpful. For somebody like me, now I don't have to go into Photoshop and actually make this box. I can just use this website to generate it and download the image. Unsplash is a big one for good stock photography that's not super cheesy. Obviously, you have like W3 Schools and JS Fiddle for messing around with code. I use Sublime Text as my editor. The big one I want to point out is this auto-prefixer. Let's say you are putting your CSS into Divi, which, hey, if that's what you're doing, that's what you're doing. But this auto-prefixer could help you out with that. So if I type in display flex, right away over here, it's creating all the prefixed code for working across different browsers. And so then if I say flex wrap, it's giving me that, and I can just copy this and go over to Divi, and if I'm putting, you know, code into the module over here, then I can just put that, and I can make sure that I'm also getting my prefixes so that it's working across different browser types. So that's a big one to utilize if you're putting your code in these particular places. And I've mentioned Flywheel numerous times, so definitely come back to this slide, check these tools out for yourself. That placeholder one is a gem for sure. It's 8:58. We have 2 minutes.
Oh, is it? Are you at the end? Oh, wow, awesome. Very cool. All right, anybody have questions? I did post in the chat if people had questions that they could put them on the meetup, but yeah, if you're still here and you have questions, by all means. I had a question, I forget it already.
I'm trying to, where do I get the chat at?
There were just a couple quick comments. Like I mentioned something about pods. So some people really like pods. So as an alternative to both CPT UI and advanced custom fields, I think you can use pods that goes together. I don't know how Divi works with that. And I also use your tools. I don't use pods, but some people like pods. So
yeah, when I listened to the various podcasts, that was something that came up a lot. But also in those same podcasts, those people were saying, if it's relatively something simple and straightforward, they just end up using, you know, UI and advanced custom fields. But I'm dipping my toe into it at this point.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. There was a question about what was the importance of the important tag and why shouldn't you use important?
Yeah, sorry, I misspelled that.
Yeah, that's okay. I got it.
Oh, you're cool. So basically, like, let's say Divi is like, Renee, do I need to back off of screen sharing or?
No, you can keep screen sharing.
Okay.
I don't know what's being recorded though right now, so I don't know if it's
yeah, no, it's
just
okay.
you talking. It's fine.
So like, let's say that Divi has section.module, and it's like color white. Okay. And then you write some CSS that's like section color blue. Well, their CSS is more specific than yours, so this rule may overwrite yours. And so you write color blue and you're like, why isn't this changing? So then what you'll see people do is they'll put important in like that, and it basically says, this should override this, period. And at first, you're like, great, I have the design that I want. But then later, if you want to write a new rule and you want something else, this rule will get overruled by this one. And if you forget where that is, you're like, why isn't this working? And then you just keep stacking important tags and it just keeps getting out of control. And so that's why selector specificity is really important to make use of as much as you can. Now, a good thing about important is it can help you when you're troubleshooting things. So I'll put some custom CSS in and I'm like, why isn't this working? So then I go into Chrome and I go into the inspector and I'm looking around the CSS and I'm like, just not getting it. So then I'll throw an important tag into the Chrome CSS and then all of a sudden it turns on and I'm like, okay, so this is working. Something is overriding it. Okay. And then I just keep tweaking it more and more. So it can be helpful in that situation. Now, I will admit there are some situations with Divi where you might have to use it. They can be willy-nilly with how they use it sometimes. I guess as they're figuring out like and adding new stuff to their code base, sometimes they use it. But I don't run into too many situations anymore where I can't overcome stuff that they're doing. I had a weird situation with a custom post type with a certain plugin I had going on where it was adding an important tag to something and I couldn't override it. And that's where you kind of beat your head against a wall when people use that type of stuff.
I think also, Mark, when you put here like blue important, and then you're writing additional code right here, obviously you're going to see that, but you mentioned before about all the other places you can put CSS and all the other places everybody else put CSS. So yeah, sometimes you finding where that is like next to impossible. So
yeah, you're just like, why won't this change?
You're like, where is it? And
then, a great thing about the inspector too, is you can start to go through the file tree and find out where is this CSS at? What file is this in? What plugin is this associated with? And you have to like sometimes go down this extreme rabbit hole to figure out where this piece is. And it's so sad. You like spend an hour of your life trying to figure out why a piece of text won't turn a different color. But it happens.
Okay, and then I think you mentioned there was like an alternative was like .class.
Yeah, so that's
the module part you just kind of like ran through.
Yeah, that's what I mean by, I don't know why I can't get this to go over the chat window. Oh, there's the chat window. Okay. Yeah, so that's just like, I can't remember all the rules with it, but it's like if you have an element like body, that's one level of specificity. Then you have class, that's another level of specificity. Then you have your ID, that's another level of specificity. So if something is just called like section, but then I target body dot section, or let's go even further, like hashtag special section dot section. That's even more specific. Or this element could have an ID and this class. And you just start combining selectors like that, and you can get more specific with your rules.
All right, because I know I've used WordPress with important, and then stuff just gets real messed up, especially if you have to like hand code all your CSS.
Yeah, and so that's why I will at times, like Divi, like I said, their stock class for a section is etpb section. Well, then I'll go into the builder on the back end and add my own class, and it will be Pxl. I'm just making this up, special section. But this class and this class are actually on the same section. So instead of having a space, because this isn't a child of this element, this is actually the same element. So I delete the space, and now I'm saying basically look for a section that has these two classes and add this style, and this is more specific than this.
Okay.
There's a couple links that we put in the chat, so there's maybe some place to investigate.
CSS is so funny because it's one of those, if you want to call it a language, that seems so simple on the surface, and then as you get into it, you're like, oh my gosh, this is like I just started messing around with like cropping in CSS and being able to decide where the image focuses when it's cropped and stuff. And I was like, whoa, this is so crazy that I can crop this as like a whole nother level of responsive images. And it's just, there's just so many layers to this. But you can really get away with a lot of basic stuff.
So there's two other questions in the chat right now. So Zach is talking about the polygon GPS via ACF. I'm going to guess that Mark doesn't know how to do that since he said he learned ACF like 2 days ago.
Yeah.
And I've also not worked with it. So sorry. And Philip asked, does Divi have a feature where it can draw a site on the screen? I'm not sure, Philip, what you mean draw a site on the screen. If you want to elaborate on that.
I like to draw sites on I used Microsoft Word for it and the table feature because I learned how to make websites back when tables were used for layout
Crazy.
back in the 90s. And so I was wondering if Divi had a way that I could just like sketch out on the screen where I could get where I wanted things like a wireframe, because I noticed you used an Adobe product for that.
Yeah, I know. I think I kind of mentioned this in the last presentation. There's a number of people that I've seen more moving towards, I don't even wireframe. I just hop into Divi and I start making my structure and designing. I personally don't prefer doing that because I like to zoom out and see the whole website to get an idea of how this page flows from beginning to end, how everything's tied in together. They don't necessarily have like while there is wireframe mode, they don't have like a wireframe tool where all you're doing is like putting blocks and stuff in. Although, you know, I've seen people just go in and I'm going to add a text module here, a button module here. They're not styling anything. They're just kind of putting things in place. To me, that's a lot of interface to have to work through in order to just make shapes. So I've only worked with XD for wireframing, and XD is like CSS. It can be as deep as you want it to be, where you're like making full-fledged websites essentially with it, or it can just be a matter of, I'm gonna put a box here, I'm gonna put a box over here, this is a button. I've really enjoyed working with XD because I can go as deep as I want with it, and it creates nice usable wireframes that clients can click through then. And you know, you don't have to like give them a passcode to get into a private protected site, or you know. So yeah, I would say they don't have necessarily a built-in tool for wireframing, although you could get away with jumping in and just doing the basics to get things on the screen so you get an idea.
Cool. Any last questions? Speak now. You can always go back to the meetup, like I mentioned, and put comments or questions there. And also on the website where the slides are and where the video will be, you can put comments there as well. And if you would share this on social, if you enjoyed the presentation, you know, share the group, share the presentation, share any of our future meetups, come back. If you'd like to speak or are interested in learning about something specifically, if you want to reach out to me, or you could tweet at the group and just say, hey, I would really like to learn about X, Y, or Z, and we'll try to find a speaker. But I am always looking for new speakers who are interested in any specific thing. And we have meetups for all groups. So for beginners, for intermediates, for advanced, whatever you want to speak about, you know something more than somebody else knows. And so we really like new speakers. So that's my quick spiel. So thank you so much, everybody.
I just did thing to show everybody. Remember I mentioned how I have a style sheet for my login page. So like this is a simple styled login page that I can make for a client. And it's just one of those nice little touches where if they're going to go there, it just makes it feel like it's their own thing instead of it being this, you know. So you get that in place. I change the image, I change some colors, and now it feels like stylized just for them. So just thought to show that off. So
yeah, it's very nice.
Thank you everybody so much for soldiering through
Yeah.
all of that information with me. I wish we had some more time for like discussion here, because I'm sure you guys have a lot of stuff to share too, but thank you, Renee, so much for giving me the opportunity for both of these times.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think everybody enjoyed it, and hopefully people who had to leave early or couldn't attend can watch the recap and learn a lot. I know there's a few of us here who have some work to do, who are inspired and ready to make some changes in our own workflow. So that's awesome.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah,
Well, thank you, everybody.
Okay, everybody have a good night. Take care.